The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan, your host, ably assisted today by Toto, my best dog friend. Today, we're in part 3 of a trilogy. This one is Sergeant Mason. Archangel Michael had a lot to say in this one. We always invite him at the beginning of each session to keep us safe from anything that might try to cause trouble. But usually he called himself the strong, silent type. He usually just is keeping us safe. That's what he does. But this time he came through to speak, and this part is part 3 of a trilogy. So parts 1 and 2 are the previous 2 episodes. In brief, Sergeant Mason brought me a story in a dream, and it was a very odd story. I felt like I was in World War II, that I was witnessing infighting between 2 different groups of American soldiers. I don't know a lot about military organization, but I do know that there'll be a unit with a certain number next to another unit with another number, and they each have their own sergeant. Sometimes they're called a Texas regiment or a Massachusetts regiment or something like that, depending upon how they're comprised. Anyway, they're subunits within the larger context of being comrades in arms. But that doesn't mean that there can't be rivalries that spring up between component groups. That's what I was getting from what I received in the dream. When we got to deal with him, Sergeant Mason, that's his last name, explained that he was a young man in his early 20s, a healthy American young man who was beginning a career in journalism. Journalism interested him because he liked to tell stories, and he liked the idea, the vocation of informing people about true things that they wouldn't know if there weren't journalists to investigate and write and deliver the news. So when Pearl Harbor happened, he said it really was impossible not to enlist at that time if you were a young, healthy American guy. And so he said, I did enlist. When they learned that I had this career, this job skill, they directed me toward military correspondence school, war correspondents who report on the progress of the war as a part of the official chain of command in the military. So he did that. He said it was understood that we were a little bit like chaplains. We weren't expected to be on the front lines firing weapons at an enemy like an infantryman. I would be in the back with my typewriter, observing things and chronicling them. He also said that part of his job was to do official correspondence on behalf of his unit. One sad part of that was writing condolence letters home after there'd been a death. Anyway, he explained that that was his job, but that one day on the job, he witnessed infighting that started over a stick of chewing gum. Isn't that ridiculous? But doesn't life have its ridiculousness in it? Mine does. Um, he said that you had to understand that they had, in order to ramp up to fight a war on 2 fronts, we were brought into the war in the Pacific because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but the war was already raging and had been for several years in Europe. And once we entered it, we were having to fight a war on 2 fronts. He said we were very overstretched, and they cast a very broad net, bringing in enlisting everybody they could. And he said not everyone, the standards were where everyone is brought in. And he said some of them weren't people of great character, and sometimes they were even given leadership. And when they were, the men under their direction sometimes took on poor characteristics. We weren't all the best and the brightest and the most noble. Nevertheless, it was the war was on, and the war effort, pursuing the war effort, was essential, and his superiors felt like part of that fell to a correspondent was to tell stories that inspired people on the home front because there was plenty of sacrifice to be done back at home, and people need to be inspired and so on. And so there was an aspect of his work that wasn't just simple truth telling. It was, he didn't use the word propaganda, and that usually has a very negative connotation to it, but it doesn't have to. It just is a messaging that has a particular slant. Well, when it occurred, when he witnessed soldiers kill each other, he said, "You have to understand that you had taken all these young men, you trained them in the use of weapons, you teach them about um, fighting an enemy, you get you get them agitated in order to be willing to take human life for this higher cause." He said, "You get that all started, it's kind of hard to put that genie back in the bottle. There's times when, if you teach people to be aggressive, it can spill over." And he said this, and at the battlefront, sometimes the rations that soldiers got to eat were only canned food and hard biscuits. It happened on a particular day that someone got a care package from home and it included chewing gum. He said these men hardly ever tasted anything sweet. It was just the same old canned goods and hard biscuits. But today, somebody had received a package from home. They left it unguarded because who thinks you need to guard chewing gum? But they left it unguarded, and someone helped himself to it without asking. That started a war of words, a fist fight, something that escalated into gunfire. He said the roots of animosity between units, or competition at least between units, was already there. It exploded into this ugly display. And instead of being able to tell the truth about it in writing, he was told not to. And he was made to write letters of condolence home to loved ones whose soldier had died because of this, but he wasn't allowed to say any detail. He could only use a vague phrase like, your son died in the service of his country. He felt really bad about that, but he felt that there wasn't much he could do about it because he existed in a chain of command. He wasn't free to do as he pleased, except now he knew of this murder that he wasn't allowed to speak of and had to pretend didn't happen. He explained to us that he lived a long life after the war. He did not die during the war. He lived for decades longer, and died an old man, but he never revealed the truth of what he knew, and it always bugged him. You can imagine that, can't you? He said it was he had a distaste for um, patriotic displays that occur routinely on the 4th of July or Memorial Day or other such occasions. He said, it's not that I didn't love my country, it's just that I knew too much. And people didn't really want to hear a lot of war stories except ones that were about valor and courage. And uh, uh, he just felt like there was a secret that he carried that he felt degraded him. And he felt ashamed that he hadn't told the truth. Well, he brought that into the afterlife, and that was his primary issue. He felt like he had not told the truth, at least not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And so he was helped in the afterlife with his guardian and his team, who helped him find a way forward because it was holding him back. He didn't go into a lot of detail about the way forward, except to try to come to some peace with the fact that he was in a circumstance that really had a lot of elements that were beyond his control. I've found that in my ministry in counseling and confessional work as a Catholic priest, that sometimes people have their conscience is bothering them because of something they did or failed to do, and sometimes once you ask a little bit about the context, you see that a person was really in some circumstance that was overwhelming, and they they didn't know what to do, and they ended up doing or not doing something that they felt was fraudulent, and that's on their conscience, and that's why they're going to confession or bringing it up in counseling. Sometimes it's your job just to say, well, would you do it differently now? And if so, what would you do? If you could go back and replay that part of your life, would you do it differently or would you not? And when I ask that, I don't presume a right answer. I just wait to hear what a person has to say. Sometimes they come to the conclusion that no, I don't know. I think if I was faced with the same circumstance, I might do the same thing again, even though I know that it was beneath my dignity or that a more courageous person might have done a different thing. Anyway, in the afterlife, his team helped him find some peace with the fact that it's true that he participated in falsehood and he owned that. And that was really, it was like he apologized to the universe or something, where he just owned up to the fact that I didn't do all that I could have to testify to the truth. Um, and I wish I had, or I'm sorry that I didn't, something like that. He didn't dwell on it. He just told us that people helped him kind of calm down and recognize that this could be holding him back, and it would be good if he just acknowledged the truth that yes, he did less than his best, and could you find your peace with that? Have you had to do that ever in your life? Has there ever been a point where you just had to say, you know what? Yeah, I could have done better there, or I wish I'd done this and not that. We do that. Catholics do it in confession a lot of the time. Not always. We can do that in a number of ways, but that's a particular forum that we use to do that. So, um, anyway, it turned out that we never tell any of these stories first we help the person move along, and then if we think we want to tell one of these stories in a public forum, like a podcast or a book, we go back and ask a second time. We go back into protected prayer, and we ask their permission to use their story. Well, this time, you might want to go back and look at the previous two or listen to the previous two podcasts. But St. Michael had come through and spoken, and he spoke some about truth and about how sometimes different groupings of humans will agree on some version of events that's not completely true, but it's the story we tell ourselves, and it's our kind story. And if we don't oppose the other kind, um, they'll have the upper hand. He said this oppositional energy sometimes encourages human folks to believe things that they know aren't true, even while they're believing them and even testifying to them. Um, he he he's a really well-spoken guy. I really love Michael and love working with him. But I wanted to offer a few comments. It's such a vast topic. This theme of the third part of a trilogy, the way we have it constructed, is spiritual practice. So I go personal on that because I'm a spiritual practitioner. I'm a lifelong Catholic Christian, 40 years a priest, and I believe I'm a member of the universe, which I believe is full of God, made of God's love, and it's full of truth. I follow Jesus the Christ, the crucified and risen one. He wasn't the victor all the time. He died an ignominious death with collusion of political and religious leaders of his time, and his own closest ones denying they even knew him. But he rose 3 days later and said, "Peace be with you," and started what I think of as the eighth day of creation. We start over. Um, so, and we rectify whatever we can, make things right. Well, in John's gospel, he refers to himself, Jesus calls himself the way, the truth, and the life. And one of the ways that I deal with true and false and so many of the ways it can manifest, is when I get perplexed about what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act? What am I supposed to think? When I get feel confounded, I ask Jesus to come and sit next to me. He's really inside me already. So, but it's just the way I do it in my imagination. I say, "Hey, truth," because he called himself, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Sometimes I use it as a nickname and I'll say, "Hey, truth, would you come sit by me, please?" Kind of like Toto's in my lap right now. Would you come and sit by me? Because I need insight into a deeper truth so that I can think and act in whatever the circumstances. Um, One of the things I learned in all those years that I was in theology studies in seminary is Aristotle and Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, taught that truth has a definitive nature. Truth has a definitive nature of itself before we bring any thought to it or opinions about it. For example, I was born in Texas. That's a truth. It's a definitive truth. It's not a matter of anybody's opinion. It's just the truth. Truth has oftentimes a definitive nature. So if someone comes along and wants to say, that's not true, Nathan was not born in Texas, he was born in Puerto Rico. Well, they can assert something to be true. And somebody, if they wanted to, could try to create a story about me being born in Puerto Rico or, some, uh, it would be nonsense. It wouldn't be the truth. But that doesn't mean that people don't say things that are nonsensical. And sometimes they have a group reason for doing so. But the truth has a definitive nature, and it's really not subject to the whims of other people's opinions, even if they are powerful people with uh, broadcast networks or whatever. The truth has a definitive nature apart from what anyone brings to it. I believe that's part of the nature of the Godhead and of Jesus as, with the way that Christians think of it, second person of the Trinity, that truth exists prior to my opinions about it or anybody else's opinions, that there's a definitive truth. Um, so I'll sometimes ask truth personified in Jesus, would you come and sit by me? He also said the truth will set you free. And I believe that at 69 years old, I've learned plenty about um, growing in deeper truth and being more and more free as you do so. And I've watched that happen in all the people that we help in the afterlife. Very often, the reason that they've had, use the word stuck at the beginning. I don't always use that anymore, but I have seen that people make progress in their afterlife as they turn loose, let go of ideas that are over exaggerated. Many falsehoods, whether they're lies or just things that we tell ourselves that aren't completely true, start with some kernel of truth. I've had so many people that died in accidents who blame themselves for their death and the death of other people. And yes, of course, that's true. If you hadn't been texting, maybe you wouldn't have caused the accident. But can you just accept that that happened? Can you uh, acknowledge it, apologize, uh, uh, and go on? Well, that's important to me. I'm about to do a retreat uh, in only a few days that's on the material that I wrote about in The Wizard of Oz. When I published my book, Antoto to The Wizard of Oz as a spiritual adventure back in 2011. But the story never goes away. And now the years one and two of the Wicked movies has kept it in the public imagination. There are the characters that form the body of that story, especially as it's described in the 1939 movie. All the characters are believing something about themselves that's not completely true. And you can watch it happen right in front of you. Um, I'm going to start with the scarecrow. Do you remember when Dorothy has just set out on the yellow brick road? Um, She meets a companion because she needs directions. She comes to a crossroads, and here's this scarecrow character. As it turns out, um, he's a brainless, at least he calls himself brainless direction giver. Well, you could go this way, you could go that way. Some people go both ways. But his immediate problem is he's stuck on a pole. Um, he's stuck on a pole, and he's also stuck in a job that he's no good at. He's not the least bit frightening, and that's his job is to scare crows away. Well, have you ever been in a circumstance where you really were ill-suited to your circumstance? You weren't good at this, but you were stuck doing it well until you're unstuck. In the story, he believes himself to be brainless, but you hardly have known him for more than a minute or two before Dorothy's trying out of compassion to get him down off this pole. She doesn't know how. And he says, well, I'm not smart about doing things, but maybe if you just turn the nail, I'll slip off. All right, well, you don't have to be Einstein to realize that this brainless scarecrow just problem solved. He just thought through a sequence of events and solved a problem. Even she said, well, how can you talk if you don't have a brain? And he just said, I don't know, but aren't there people who without brains who do an awful lot of talking? I think it's one of the best laugh lines in the movie. Anyway, he takes an attitude towards himself that blows something all out of proportion. He does too have the capacity to reason, but he doesn't think he does. You go through the rest of them, the Tin Man, the Tin Man in the book, um, his name is Nick Chopper in the book. He You only meet him as this rusted man made out of tin with this axe. So he's a tin woodsman. Um, but when you oil him, and he wants his jaws oiled first so he can speak. I love that part because sometimes people, maybe even you, haven't had the right moment where somebody would listen to your whole story in a way that held it sacred. Here were two people, well, three counting Toto, that you heard your name, didn't you? Um, you they he said, "Oil my mouth, my mouth." They do oil his mouth, and he can hear it creak his jaws, and he finally speaks. And they say, "How'd you get this way?" Well, it all happened at the tent. I I rested. It rained, and I rested. Well, the backstory is that he once was a flesh and blood young man who was in love and engaged to be married, but his fiance's mother would forbade her getting married because she wanted her daughter to remain unmarried to care for her in her old age. She enlisted the help of a witch to put a spell on the Tin Man so that every time, well, he wasn't the Tin Man yet, but the woodsman, so that every time that he used his axe, he chopped off a part of himself and then had to get a prosthetic. So he ends up with one tin arm and tin leg until there's nothing left of him but tin. And in the story, he says, the tinsmith forgot to give me a heart. My problem is my creator fouled up. And no, I'm empty inside. Says, go ahead, bang on my chest if you think I'm perfect. Well, they do bang on his chest because he told them to. And I think it's the scarecrow the Tin Man says, see, it's empty. And the scarecrow says, beautiful, what an echo. So they could see goodness and beauty in him when all he could see was emptiness and lack. And he even attributed the problem not it's to out of himself, his creator fouled up. You go on to the lion, and he's supposed to be the king of the jungle. He didn't necessarily ask for the job, but sometimes we arrive with a role that other people place on us and expect us to live up to it. He was supposed to be king of the jungle, and that meant being, roaring at people and uh, domineering, and he was actually afraid of rabbits. He realizes that he he doesn't like the role that he's in. He's not really the king of the forest, and he doesn't have any courage at all. Um, and that's what he lacks. It's completely outside of him. And they encourage him, and they all end up going outside of themselves to a faraway wizard who they hope will give them the thing that they lack. But each of them has believed something that wasn't true. It was based on something there, because most falsehoods have some kernel of truth at the beginning of them, or they're just completely implausible and ridiculous. But in any event, a lot of the people that my prayer partners that I've dealt with in the afterlife have something like that, where they have believed something about themselves and blown it out of proportion in a way that um, makes them feel stuck. It's not a punishment from some external God or something. It's just that they are believing something about themselves that's not completely true. And sometimes they're too harsh on and hard on themselves. Does that sound reasonable to you? It does to me. That the universe just we seem to behave that way until we come to truth. Well, in this particular story, um, Sergeant Mason, all he really needed to do was acknowledge that he was in a tough circumstance that he didn't create, that was beyond his power to do very much about. It's true that he could have uh, disobeyed orders and uh, written a story, and could he have even gotten it past censors? I don't know. He didn't go into that. Could he have done something that he didn't do? In the end, he just said, I'm sorry. I disappointed myself and I didn't tell the truth. Well, uh, there's a story that Jesus tells that I really like. It's in Mark's gospel and it's a simple little story. He used a lot of seed and agricultural stories, metaphors. He was talking about the Word of God, the truth being shared about God's love and God's desire to include all in one harmonious kingdom, all the peoples of the earth. He tells a story about a sower goes out and sows seed, but before he could, an enemy mixed in weeds with the seed, and or weed seeds, so that when the seed was sown, what came up was a mixture of weeds and wheat. In the story, the field workers go to the owner of the land and say, "What's the matter here? We sowed this seed and now it's coming up with weeds in it. Do you want us to go into the field and uproot the weeds?" And in Jesus' story, the owner of the field says, "No, by now the roots have grown together. Um, let's just let it go until harvest time, and we'll harvest it all together, and then we'll separate the weeds and the wheat." Well, Jesus it's a story, but we gets to the end of it, and he's saying to his followers, that's just the way it is. The world is a mixed bag of things, and even though you go out and do only good, you're going to find that your good is sometimes mixed in with weeds. It's not your job to pull up the weeds. Just keep doing good. He says in the story, in the end, the angels will take care of that. It's not your job. Well, I can't tell you how many times in my ministry where I've found that consoling, because when you're the boss, and I have been the boss, pastor, and run big organizations and communities, groups of people, you want to feel responsible for the outcome of things. And sometimes you make good plans and everything works. Other times you do and it doesn't. And you can feel like responsible for things that are larger than you are. There's lots of things. I joined this Dominican order because it was a reform order. And I loved my faith and my Catholic community, but I also saw that it had plenty of things about it that just seemed wrong to me, even as a little kid. And we really ought to be we're better than than this. We're capable of better. So I wanted to be a part of a reform from the inside. And now at 69 years old, there's still things in the life of the church, the life of the Dominican order, the life of the United States, the world, where I still see plenty of weeds in the wheat. And it's comforting to me that I haven't been put in charge of every last thing. I was a spiritual director once said to me, Nathan, the world has a savior and you're not it. I've remembered that for like 35 years. Um, but the idea that uh, that truth matters and that good wins out, those are important to me. And somehow that came into play in the story of Sergeant Mason. There's so many things that could be said about truth. Maybe I'll end with this one. I believe that truth is something that can be both possessed and sought at the same time. That there are things I know to be true that I don't need to go uh, searching, researching any further. There are things that I know to be true. The sun rises in the east, and I don't need another study to prove it to me. There are some things that can be known that already known, and then there are things that are not known or incompletely known. I've lived most of my life in universities. I've been in school since I was 5 years old, more or less, and I watch in the university system where an expert in a field is hired to teach classes, many of them in the morning on weekdays. And that professor will be at the front of the room with the authority vested in them by the university to teach you. And you signed up because they know things you don't. And by the end of the term, you ought to be smarter, enlightened, because this professor shared what they knew with you. That same professor in the afternoon might be in a laboratory, maybe working with graduate assistants because there's something in their field that's incompletely known or unknown, and they're trying to do experiments to expand the um, body of knowledge. You can both know a thing and not know a thing at the same time, but in different ways. So it takes humility even to be a student. Otherwise, you walk into the room, striding into the room, acting like you know everything already. You might have gone to a class or two with that person. So I believe that our veritas, our motto, is something that's like that. We can believe things that are known, and even in an organization like the Catholic Church that has a lot of authority, um, we recently uh, learned that Pope Leo is going to make John Henry Cardinal Newman a doctor of the Church. He lived for most of the 19th century, and he championed the idea of development of doctrine because sometimes people want to freeze the world of ideas. Doesn't have to be religious ideas, it could be any kind of field of study, and think that we already know that, and here it is in writing. Here's proof. Um, and then sometimes someone will come along with a new idea or a new observation, a new experiment that yields new data, and we need to change our thinking. Well, uh, that doesn't need to be thought of as a negative. It's just a development. It's the way that knowledge grows. Sometimes we have to unlearn a previous idea in order to accept uh, the new idea, the deeper truth. So for me, that's one of the ways that truth operates, or at least our search for truth operates. If the universe is infinite, and I believe it is, and it has an infinite number of things to understand and know, do you think you'll ever know it all? Or would you want to? There's something beautiful about learning. I've been in learning communities for just about all my life, and learning is a beautiful thing. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it with other people who are in the same class because they want to learn the same things I do. So there's just a humility that's necessary about any conversation that involves truth. And I think that Sergeant Mason was able to allow in a new thought. And then he didn't say that he's now the brightest star in the sky, or that he's brilliant, or he understands all truth. He just said, they put me to work helping other people, and so I've come back, and that's part of what I do. I help people who feel stuck because of something involving false and true, and I help them make their next step. Back to the yellow brick road, it's always putting one foot in front of the other. Well, that's it for right now. It's such a vast topic. I kind of put off doing this podcast because I was daunted at it. I thought, how am I going to speak for 30 or 40 minutes on truth and have something important for people to hear? But in the end, for me, again, as a follower of Jesus, if you're explicitly a Christian, baptized and practicing in a Christian church, great. If not, you can call on Jesus because he's a universal person, and he would take your call. All you have to do is ask, and truth, who is love and beauty and goodness, and would come and sit by you and maybe inspire you in your imagination to some helpful resolution of something that might be going on in your life that is confusing to you or saddens you and takes your joy. Okay, that's it. That's it for right now. Again, I'm Father Nathan Castle. Um, I'm grateful for your interest in what my prayer partners and I do. If you'd like to be in touch, I ask first that you read at least one of the books that I've written, because frequently I get people that have seen me on some podcast, my own or as a guest on someone else's, and fire off an email with a question. And I'd really rather have a more substantial conversation if you've taken the time to do a little research, to learn a little bit. My books are available on Amazon. Uh, if you can't afford the $20, they almost always have discounted ones that are used. So anyway, they're easily available. Uh, Remember too that I pray for you all the time. And when I do, I pray for wherever there's the root cause of something in you that takes your joy away. It might be some old thought that if only you could let the light of truth into it, it might go a different direction. Anyway, just know that I'm praying for you and I do that regularly. Okay? That's it for right now. That's it for this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. Please join us next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.
Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.